On the edge of tiny Cedartown, Georgia, pallets of retired solar panels arrive every week from across the southeast and beyond.
This cavernous former yarn factory doesn't look like much, but once its new owner, Solarcycle, gets up and running this year, the facility will eventually be able to recycle millions of panels a year.
Most folks associate recycling with paper cups, glass bottles. We are actually taking a high-tech product, recycling it, and putting back into a high-tech supply chain.
Last year, Solarcycle received a $64 million tax credit through the Inflation Reduction Act to build another factory across the street that will manufacture glass for new solar panels.
But Solarcycle CEO says that groundbreaking is on hold as Congress considers gutting the clean energy tax credits.
One of the worst things for running a company or organization is uncertainty.
On today's episode, are Georgia's flourishing industries making electric vehicles, batteries, and solar panels at risk if congressional Republicans roll back clean energy tax credits in the federal budget?
Plus, how the conflict between Israel and Iran is exposing divisions among Georgia Republicans.
And we'll look at the demise of in-person campaign launches. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In from WABE.
Sam, this story is so timely because the Senate is currently debating the Republican budget that passed the House, and the future of these clean energy tax credits are just one of the many changes to tax policy that could directly impact Georgia. Let's begin in Cedartown. Take us there, Sam.
Cedartown is this tiny little town in Polk County near the Alabama border. It has a cute historic downtown, but a lot of the storefronts are empty right now. And just outside the town is this big industrial site that's going to be home to Solarcycle. Facility manager Tyler Grimes led me around stacks of shiny black panels. Right now, the company is working on getting the recycling part of the business going, and across the street is this huge plot of land that eventually will be home to a glass factory. And altogether, Solarcycle says these two plants will eventually create 1,200 jobs.
We want to be a major player, diversifying the supply chain so it's not all coming from Asia, and we're doing that here in the States. Doing it in Polk County is very close to home for me, very close to my heart. You don't have to go to tech and then stay in Atlanta or move to the West Coast. You can go get a mechanical engineering degree and you can come to work for a technology company here in Polk County and stay close to home if that's what you want to do. So it helps slow down the brain drain, as they call it, from a lot of your small towns.
Now, nearly 400 major clean energy projects have been announced since Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act 3 years ago, with the promise of creating more than 100,000 jobs. 16,000 of them have been promised in Georgia, more than any other state. And 33 of the projects were announced here in Georgia, second only to Michigan. That's all according to E2, a pro-environment business group that tracks these projects. Now, one thing I do want to note here, many but not all of these projects received IRA tax credits.
Okay, so break this down. Solarcycle already got its clean energy tax credit. What is the issue?
Yes, but if Congress passes a budget eliminating or rolling back tax incentives for consumers who install solar panels and the companies that make them, Solarcycle CEO Suvi Sharma says that could affect kind of the whole solar ecosystem that's really been flourishing in Georgia. And in turn, that would affect demand for what Solarcycle's doing.
The more solar there is, the more solar there is to recycle, and the more solar panels there are to install that need the type of glass that we plan on making.
So at the moment, Solarcycle has put a pause on breaking ground on that glass manufacturing facility. And we've started to see similar situations play out nationwide. I spoke to Zach Amitai, the Southeast advocate at E2, and that group tallies about $14 billion in announced investments that have already been canceled this year.
In fairness, there's not any one single factor driving it. Some of it is high interest rates and the difficulty of finding financing for borrowing right now. But with practically every single announcement from a company sharing news about a downsize or a cancellation or a closure, they all reference market uncertainty and the threat of the tax credits being rescinded.
So what is this going to mean for Georgia Solar, battery, and EV industries?
Well, one person I asked about this is Chris Thomas, Polk County's economic development director. He worked really hard to win this Solarcycle facility along with state economic development officials. And, Governor Brian Kemp and the state have really prioritized landing these kinds of investments. Thomas called Solarcycle a generational impact for the county, but he also did not seem too worried about the IRA tax credits going away.
I think the state's incentives and the community's incentives is usually the most important. It's proven successful for many years.
Now, Sharma, the Solarcycle CEO, doesn't think curtailing the credits will be a death knell for solar, but he does worry that smaller installers will struggle to stay afloat. I spoke to one of them, Montana Bush, who runs a business based out of Athens, who said most clients are installing rooftop solar because it makes sense financially with those consumer tax credits. He had been planning to open a second office in Savannah, hiring something like 10 workers, and that's now on hold.
I feel like I did all the right things to build a business from scratch, offer good customer service and to try to be a shining light in the construction industry. And, a lot of people have built their careers around this. It feels like my country is against me all of a sudden. To do a rug pull like this it just really hurts to have to face that.
And Sharma also worries that manufacturers will think twice about setting up shop stateside.
They'll have felt the burn already, and they'll say, while it may look good today, it may not look good in 4 years. And so that's where I think the stakes are highest.
And, the stakes are also really high for communities like Cedartown.
Absolutely. Tell me more about that part, Sam.
So after touring the Solarcycle factory, I popped on over to the Polk County Historical Society. It's just packed with artifacts from the town's history, many donated by local residents. And I met 72-year-old Philip Gamage, who was wearing a red Cedartown High School t-shirt. He grew up in Cedartown and told me what it was like to stroll through downtown back then.
On Saturday mornings, this place was packed up and down Main Street. You could get in the theater, get a bag of popcorn and a Coca-Cola for 25 cents. We're trying to get back to that.
Gamage's family has operated a funeral home in town since 1950, back when the region's textile industry was booming. But as those jobs dried up, Main Street began to empty out. Gamage says regular residents might not be jumping to defend Solarcycle yet, but he thinks that'll change.
Tangible around here is, you got a job for me? Now we can talk. And 1,200 jobs is going to mean a lot to this community.
While Solarcycle hasn't done much hiring yet, Cedartown is preparing for an influx of people. There's talk of new homes, more seats in classrooms, specialized training programs at the local technical college. Now, Gamage told me he doesn't like talking politics, but he did say he would like to see those tax credits preserved.
That's a no-brainer. If that many people are going to find jobs, that's good. I don't see how anybody could have a negative view of that.
Someone who does have a negative view, the Republican congresswoman who represents this mostly rural stretch of Northwest Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I heard her talk about the tax credits at the Georgia GOP convention in Dalton this year.
Yeah, and she totally slammed them.
They always say it's going to bring jobs. Marjorie, this is going to bring jobs to your district. Baloney.
Data from E2 shows that 62% of clean energy projects announced since 2022 are in GOP congressional districts, something policymakers hoped would insulate them from cuts. But Greene says her district doesn't need the jobs. Unemployment, she says, is pretty low.
And so when they go and they plop a big fat battery production plant from South Korea, they're having to steal workers from Georgia companies. And I think that is a bunch of BS.
Not every Republican agrees. Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents a coastal Georgia district home to a new multi-billion-dollar Hyundai electric vehicle plant, signed letters urging his colleagues not to eliminate the incentives, and he defended them at a recent event hosted by a clean energy news outlet.
We should not take a sledgehammer to the IRA. Instead, we should take a scalpel. If these policies result in stabilizing our supply chain, or if they result in domestic manufacturing, why wouldn't we look at them? Why wouldn't we keep them? That's Republican priorities anyway.
But in the end, Buddy Carter, who's running for U.S. Senate, voted for that House budget and the tax credit rollback. The future of these clean energy incentives, Rahul, is now in the hands of the U.S. Senate.
Sam, thank you so much for taking us out to Cedartown, Georgia. Let's take a break here. This is Plugged In from WABE. Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE. I want to turn us now to some international news this week that has implications for Georgia politics. President Donald Trump's decision to launch bombing attacks on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities amid the conflict between Iran and Israel.
Last weekend, Governor Brian Kemp joined fellow governors for a briefing call with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. DHS issued a bulletin warning of a heightened threat environment, noting the possibility of cyber attacks and, if the conflict escalated, the potential for retaliatory violence.
Meanwhile, something I've been tracking is how Trump's decision to intervene has exposed some fissures among Georgia Republicans. More hawkish Republicans agreed with the intervention, like Congressman Rich McCormick, who spoke to Newsmax earlier this month.
If they take care of Israel, we're next. They need to be taken very seriously. And the worst possible scenario I can imagine is Iranian regime with nuclear arms.
And all 100 State House Republicans plus Democrat Esther Panich signed a resolution praising the strikes, which have been commended by Kemp and other top Republicans. Here's a little bit of that letter. We, quote, express full support for the United States and Israel in their joint efforts to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons capability and defend against regional and global terrorism, unquote. But there's a notable exception that represents more of the MAGA base of the party, and that's Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right. I mean, Greene has promoted more of a anti-interventionist stance that she says is more in line with the America First movement. She wrote earlier this week in a lengthy social media post that intervention is a, quote, complete bait and switch from Trump's pledge to put America first. She then later posted a video of herself hanging up on an unidentified reporter who seemed to be, politely asking questions about whether this represented any kind of break with Trump.
Fully support President Trump, but I'm also my own person with my own opinion, and I can speak out and say I am against being involved in foreign wars. So there's nothing wrong with me saying that I'm against this. So it's okay for me to say things like that. And this is America where we're allowed to have differing opinions.
Have you talked to him directly about it?
I don't have to answer any more of your questions because I am sick and tired of your narrative, and I'm calling it out as complete and total bull.
Okay.
So we're done. No, we're done.
And Rahul, I think this is all really interesting because it's a thread I also heard from voters a couple of years ago in the district next door to Greene's, the one represented by Republican Representative Andrew Clyde. And many voters there told me that they had wanted to see House Speaker Kevin McCarthy ousted because of his support for funding the war in Ukraine.
And look, Sam, I talked to Trump supporters on the campaign trail who don't want the United States involved in every overseas issue. The words I heard is, we're not the world's policemen. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any electoral fallout. But frankly, Sam, 2026 is so far away. This will likely be a distant memory if nothing else happens.
So let's stay in Congress for a moment, where Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff had a contentious exchange this week with President Donald Trump's budget director over proposed cuts to the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
The back and forth happened during a hearing over the administration's proposal to rescind more than $9 billion of funding, including for public broadcasting.
So while the Senate Appropriations hearing focused on that rescission package, Ossoff actually hammered Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought on CDC cuts proposed in next year's budget.
The Center for Disease Control.
Answer the question.
They were incompetent.
Answer the question,
Last
Mr. Vought.
pandemic.
Does your budget
We
request
certainly
seek to cut by more than half the CDC budget?
We certainly seek to cut and reduce
By more than half the CDC budget. Listen,
extent to
Mr. Vought,
which-
you need to come to Georgia and visit the
Happy to.
CDC.
And this was notable because Ossoff has faced criticism from some laid-off CDC workers for not fighting this forcefully enough. The other lawmakers, though, questioned vote about the efforts to claw back billions Congress had already appropriated, much of that for international aid programs like PEPFAR, which combats HIV/AIDS. About $1 billion in funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is also on the line. WABE receives about 10% of its budget from CPB. Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski underlined the importance of public radio to her state.
I hope you feel the urgency that I'm trying to express on behalf of the people in rural Alaska, and I think in many parts of rural America, where this is their lifeline. This is where they get the updates on that landslide. This is where they get the updates on the wildfires that are coming their way.
For decades, we've had concerns with the extent to which public broadcasting was funding content that was run contrary to the American people, and we've got to get to the point where we can finally deal with that.
Now, the Senate has until July 18th to approve the rescission, which passed the House earlier this month. Okay, Rahul, looking ahead now, you wanted to flag a couple of bills that are becoming law on July 1st.
So there are more than 200 laws that are kicking in next week. And, I picked one that I've been looking at recently, and that involves housing, specifically the growth of out-of-state landlords. House Bill 399 was a bipartisan bill. It was authored by Democratic State Representative Mary Margaret Oliver.
Out-of-state purchasers of single-family homes in Georgia must use a local real estate broker to complete the transaction, the transfer of title to an out-of-state owner.
Representative Oliver points out that this goes beyond knowing the name of the owner and just having a contact in Georgia when it comes to issues with the home someone's renting.
When he or she, as a broker, is doing house repairs and responsible for rental property conditions, the Real Estate Commission now under 399 has the ability to sanction that real estate broker if the house is not being maintained, take away his or her license.
Oliver believes that this will discourage some bad actors from buying up homes in Georgia. I also want to mention one other important piece of legislation that takes effect July 1st, the 2026 state budget. And the important thing I'm watching there are federal changes to Medicaid, food stamps, and in other areas. And what will that mean for the state budget specifically? Will the state of Georgia be put into a position to backfill funding, not just because of cuts in funding, but changes in policy?
Okay, as we look ahead to the future, we're kind of nearing the end of the first flurry of campaign announcements for 2026. In a moment, I've got a fun look at something I've been taking away from this season. But Rahul, what big takeaway do you have as this 2026 field begins to take shape?
As you said, it is still very early. There's still going to be a lot of candidates to jump into a lot of races. But something I've noticed on the Republican side are the number of candidates who are absolutely and completely connecting themselves to President Donald Trump when they launch their campaigns. Perfect example, State Senator Steve Gooch, who's running for lieutenant governor.
We've passed some really strong conservative, pro-life, pro-family legislation, pro-America First agenda, supporting President Donald Trump. And I want to continue to make sure that the Senate leads in that direction.
Now, one person who I noticed didn't do this as much is State Senator John F. Kennedy, who's also running for lieutenant governor. He's seemingly focused on his relationship with Governor Brian Kemp.
Not to say that there's nothing there, but I don't want to make too much of that either. But I would tell you that I think it's critical for us to continue the good leadership that we've had. And I think of that more localized on a state level. And of course, I think of our governor and I think of Brian Kemp and what he's done for the last 6.5 years.
And one other bit of news about both of these men, Kennedy has stepped down as State Senate President Pro Tem, and Gooch has stepped down as Senate Majority Leader. Senate Republicans have nominated Larry Walker III to be the new President Pro Tem and elected Jason Anavitarte to be the next Majority Leader. But Sam, as you mentioned, you've got something a little more fun to talk about with all these campaign launches.
Yes. So when Republican State Senator Brian Strickland launched his 2026 campaign for Georgia Attorney General earlier this month, he did something unusual. Instead of just releasing a digital video, he made his announcement in person.
Sam, I love this story. As somebody who loves going to campaign launches, it's something I've noticed too.
Yeah, so Senator Strickland, in a blue suit, no tie, and cowboy boots with the gold dome of the Capitol behind him, got in front of a stand of microphones and shared his news with reporters.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here today. It's an exciting day. My wife, Lindsay, here with me. It's an exciting day for us as we officially announce my run for Attorney General next year.
Strickland joined State Senator Bill Cowsert in seeking the GOP nomination, and no prominent Democrat has declared yet. Once a political staple, the traditional campaign launch has become a rarity, says University of Georgia political science professor Audrey Haynes.
What if it rains? What if no one shows up? What if there's a heckler in the audience? Now it is digital, digital, digital.
Haynes told me slick video announcements can be shared and allow candidates to introduce themselves on their own terms. That's how Republican Attorney General Chris Carr launched his campaign for governor.
We will write the next great chapter in our story, one where Georgia stays safe, prosperous, and free.
Though State Representative Derek Jackson did do an in-person launch, other Democratic contenders for governor also launched with digital videos.
The reason I love basketball so much, if you hustle, stand strong, and work together, you can overcome the odds and win.
That's State Senator Jason Estevez. Here's former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms.
My grandmama taught us to always stand up to bullies and to always look out for each other.
Even President Joe Biden launched his re-election this way.
This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election.
But still, Sam, launch events have created like iconic moments. I mean, are we going to miss those?
Sure. I mean, think Donald Trump riding down his golden escalator in 2015. Or Barack Obama outside the Illinois state capitol in 2007.
To all of you who've traveled from far and wide to brave the cold today. I know it's a little chilly.
But Professor Haynes says she's not nostalgic for these big events.
My glasses are not rose-colored. Even in the old days, going to a political event, it was not something that the majority of people engaged in.
Brian Strickland told me he thought it would be fun to kick off his campaign the old-fashioned way, but his campaign also made sure to put out a video announcement on social media too.
Sam, thank you so much for finishing on a fun note. That's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, make sure you head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave us a rating.
You can also now find us on the radio at 90.1 every Friday morning from 9:30 to 10.
And remember, as public media faces an uncertain funding stream, you can support this work with a gift to WABE at wabe.org/donate. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas. We'll be back next week.